Hello everybody, my name is Stephen McCracken and tonight you're all very welcome to Trasnatira. We are very lucky in this island at times that we're able to hear from those who made history and contributed to it. Today we're joined by and welcome the authors of this excellent book called Up Like a Bird, Brendan Hughes and Douglas Dalby. Brendan, as you all are probably aware, is escaped by a helicopter from Mountjoy Prison. And Douglas Dalby is an investigative journalist who previously worked for the New York Times, Sunday Times Ireland, and many other news outlets. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Douglas.
Good evening and welcome everyone. In case you're wondering about the accent, it's originally Glaswegian, but you won't hold that against me. I'll talk a little bit about the background to the book first, because I think it's important to kind of put it in context to actually understand it a little bit better. As you can see with the cover, for a start, we decided that we wanted something like an early 70s album cover. So we wanted something kind of a bit more psychedelic, almost something that would chime in. We were both determined that we wouldn't have a kind of another book with a picture of somebody with a balaclava pointing a rifle at us. So we wanted to do something different. And we also wanted to signal that the book would be very accessible rather than something that would be essentially academic. It would be much more a kind of thriller, the way it would be read like a page turner. So that makes it more historically accessible too. So this is kind of how the story came about, how I get involved. I've been a journalist for nearly 30 years. To be honest, I'd never heard of Brendan Hughes. And when someone called me up and said, Brendan Hughes wants to tell his story, I says, you're a bit, maybe 10 years too late. Because I obviously thought of the dark when I heard of Brendan Hughes, and a mutual friend of ours, Maureen Shields, said, no, Brendan Hughes from Tyrone, the guy who did the helicopter job. And I says, what? I said, I never, ever heard of it. But anyway, we got the original draft, read it, realized this was a great story. I'm a journalist long enough to realize what a breaking story looks like. And even after 50 years, as far as I was concerned, this was a great news story, because none of this had ever come out. It had never been written before. I'd never read it. And the more research I did, the more I realized that all the concentration had been in the three escapees from the escape, rather than who had actually carried out the escape. And if it stopped there, my life would have been easier. But then I met Brendan, and he said, well, then there was Portlaoise. I said, what about Portlaoise? Well, like I was part of the escape there. Okay. And then before that, I did this, and before that, and we did a few field trips around Tyrone, and I think every corner we turned, there was another story. So I was like, you are making my life incredibly hard. But so that's where we went, the book. Just a little bit in the historical context. I know most people here would be aware of this, but it struck me when I was doing this that the troubles, and when Brendan started out, it's almost the same period of time, looking back now, it's 50 years as the foundation of the state and partition of Ireland 50 years prior. And so to me, the 70s and certainly the 80s don't seem that long ago. And I'm sure to Brendan's generation, even if he was born after partition, his parents or grandparents would certainly have been steeped in it. So it wouldn't have been unusual. Like that 50 years is a very short period of time, I thought. And I thought it was very, it's something that never really occurred to me in the context of the outbreak of the Troubles. And also, I was very, very aware historically that I was talking to a primary source. And even though this wasn't going to be academic, it was firsthand and possibly unique perspective on a lot of the period, the early 70s, especially in the South. And the more I went reading and the more I went researching, there's actually a dearth of information on what would have been the equivalent of the Ho Chi Minh Trail for the IRA, which was the south of Ireland, south of the border. So with that in mind, I moved on. This is one of Brendan's, I suppose, mantras or quotes, which is from Paulo Coelho. Says, and it's all about destiny, really. And you do make choices in life. One of his defendants, character witnesses in one of his court cases, remarked that he was part of the flotsam and jetsam of the Troubles. And I knew what the person was trying to do, but to my mind, it was very dismissive, because that almost inferred that he was being carried along somehow by the stream. In actual fact, anyone, I think, that took up arms against a vastly superior force did not do so lightly. And in actual fact, they made a conscious decision to do that. So I don't think they were carried along in that sense. Certainly Brendan wasn't. Moving on to civil rights and internment, a little bit of background to Brendan. He joined the Civil Rights Organization 68, then the officials after that. Brendan will fill you in a little bit on this, but as you can see here, he was actually seminal and fundamental in founding the East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional IRA. And this is what led up to it. So at the very start, this man, young fella, was a plasterer 1 minute, and within 2 or 3 years, he was one of the most wanted men in Ireland. I can't go on. Part of the book is, there was a photojournalist, and I think this speaks to the difference in the times. There was a photojournalist from the States called P. Michael O'Sullivan, who was actually embedded with the IRA for about a year, 18 months. And he took so many photographs, and he was out in the field, and he had unprecedented access. And what it shows is that it was a very, very different time. Now, the photographs themselves were banned, but we managed to contact his daughter, Siobhan. And even though it was COVID and we were back and forwards online, eventually she gave us permission to use her late father's photographs. And they're very intrinsic to the book. And this, for example, is a photograph of Brendan, obviously doing time very hard in Monaghan Garda Station. You can see the stress written all over him. But again, it showed you that kind of unprecedented access that O'Sullivan had. And he's a very intrinsic part of the book. So again, these are kind of the stills you see there. And they're all coming from the book itself. And we managed to get them. So very, very important part of the book. Maybe we might have an exhibition at some stage. We're not sure of the status, whether they're still banned or not. I've never seen a lifting order, so they probably are. Now, before I go introduce things, Brendan now, I suppose, start talking about the early days and Tyrone and the setup of the secret unit, which is one of the first things that's revealed in the book. Over to you, Brendan.
Well, my first involvement, I suppose, in the Troubles was probably a civil rights thing, you see. So I went to a civil rights march. The first civil rights march was from Cullen to Dungannon. I was on it, and as a result of that and squatting at a house, as a result of Joe Campbell and Austin Corey leading the way and squatting at a house, it opened the door for other people. And I, being forever the opportunist, I squatted into an empty house about 4 doors away from me. So in the course of that, I met Kevin Mullen. I suppose I didn't know anything about that. I wasn't a Republican. I had no history whatsoever. Up until I joined the officials, I had no interest in the board. I had no idea. I was brought up in the north and I was educated under the northern system, and history wasn't a strong subject up there. So I knew nothing about history. The civil rights sort of started to educate me. Joining the official Sinn Féin further educated me. It was a natural progression from that to join the IRA. I joined the officials and spent a long time walking through fields and doing all sorts of things like that. Learned to familiarizing myself with weapons and explosives and whatever. And this went on until sort of internment came in. So I got up one morning and Faulkner was on the television explaining why he had introduced internment, and I got my breakfast and went out and couldn't find anyone. The whole unit I was with had vanished. So I went to, and the only one I could go to was Kevin Mullen. So I went to Kevin, got him out of bed. We headed off and lifted a dump that he had from the 50s and tore it away and cleaned it up and put it away for that night. This was the day of internment, the very first day. So when we went along to pick it up that night, we were unfortunate because the British Army had set up a checkpoint within sight of where we had the guns. So we were this was a bit of a setback. So on the way back, I happened to meet one of the officials, and he knew where some of the weapons were. So he went off and came back with a Thompson in a bag. So somebody assembled it, and we all snuck down along the wall somewhere. On the other side of the wall, the British Army was trying to control a riot, and this soldier was up on top of a jeep operating a searchlight. So the guy was with their weapon, opened fire on me, hit him, and the soldier was very lucky because the bullets hit him across the chest, and in his pockets he had rubber bullets, and they prevented him being seriously injured, but it blew him off the back of the thing. Anyway, Mullen said afterwards that we should be employed to stopping riots, because the minute those shots were fired, everybody legged it, like including us. We're all, and the Brits, they opened fire back. Anyway, so that was the first action of the East Tyrone Brigade, and Kevin Mullen and myself would put ourselves down as forces, founder members of that. I operated in Tyrone for several years after that. I was a fundraiser, as they call it, robbing banks and doing things like that. I mean, I've lost count of them. I couldn't possibly tell you how many banks I robbed. There was that many of them. And went on from that to, at one stage then, I was told I was going to move. I was OC of Tyrone for a while, and did that for a while, and continued to build up the brigade in East Tyrone. But then I was taken out and told I was having to form a special unit to operate all over the island. I mean, I could go anywhere I wanted. I could take any volunteer I wanted, and I could do practically what I wanted within reason. And I said I would do this, but on one condition, that I would recruit. When each job came up, I would pick the people I wanted to do, and I would pick them from the East Tyrone Brigade. So all of the work that this unit did, every job that was done was commanded by East Tyrone, with the assistance of volunteers from Donegal, from South Derry, Dublin, and we operated for not a very long period of time. We did, but anything we did was substantial. It was robberies were top class. They were the biggest in the country. The escapes we did, they were all part of this unit's. What would you say? Their work. What else do you want to know, then? Where do I go from here? Anyway, being part of the IRA, it was like a liberating experience, because suddenly I was in a position to question people who were making their lives unbearable, who were beating us up the streets. And, I was empowered not only by the weapons, but as time went on, I realized I had this talent. It was a talent for organization, and it was a talent. I was a sort of a natural tactician. So it just came natural. Everything I did came natural. No one ever trained me to do anything. No one ever showed me how to do these things. I just saw a problem and found a way around it. It's as simple as that. And time went past and we were doing these stuff. So the robbery in Navan, which is I wasn't on, which was outlined in the book, was one of the first things. When that was over, then the next thing I was contacted by Kevin Mann to do the helicopter job. I knew nothing about helicopters, and I said, okay, well, I'll look at it and I'll try and do it. So contacted a friend of mine in Portlaoise, and I asked him to find out, to say he needed a helicopter and let me know what the story was. So anyway, it transpired that to hire a helicopter was a lot simpler than hiring even a car. If you want to hire a car, you had to have tax, you had to have insurance, you had to have ID, you had all these things. But you go to hire a helicopter, all you needed was the money. So that for a couple of £100, you had a helicopter. So we hired the helicopter. We made a slight error. We took the helicopter. We didn't take it far enough away from Dublin. We didn't think. I didn't think properly about it. But anyway, we took it out the first time, as it was outlined in the book. We had to put the helicopter back again and have another go at it. But the second time around was a bit more difficult because in the course of doing it the first time, it had come to the notice of the guards, and the guards then, even though nothing untoward had happened, the fact that people with northern accents had hired a helicopter, brought it out to a golf course on the outskirts of Dublin, and then abandoned it, so to speak. Well, not so much abandoned, but called the flight as planned off. This had to arouse a lot of suspicion among the guards. So we had to assume that the guards knew, because the old special branchman in Dublin, like, I mean, he's a guy who's been around for a long, long time, he can read the signs. So I said to myself, these guys know we're after this, so how do I get around this? I came up with the idea that if I could get an American or a person with a good American accent, that maybe we'd have a way around it. So I asked GHQ for £1,000 and an American. I got the £1,000. The American took a bit of time, but anyway, we got eventually the American turned up in the form of a guy called Liam Quinn, originally from San Francisco, I think, and he was up in Derry operating. I didn't know him from Adam, but he arrived down, and I told him, I said, here, this is what we want you to do. We want you to go in and hire a helicopter, but it's not as straightforward as that. What I want you to do, I want you to fly to London. I want you to book into the best hotel what the money we give you will afford you to do. When you go in, book in and walk away from the desk, and then walk back and ask them to book the helicopter. And this is what happened. A lady from reception in a leading hotel in London phoned up Irish Helicopters, booked the helicopter for an American tourist who was at that time looking for their roots. Americans used to come over here and looking for their roots, to chase their ancestors down. So this is what he was going to do, allegedly. And it all just dropped into place, just worked. There's not a lot more I can say about it. We had a few close shaves on it, but it all worked out fine, and we got away with it. So that was okay. I'd been on the run here for, I'd been on the run for a couple of 3 years. Most of the time I was on the run both sides of the border. So when you went to bed at night, you were waiting on the knock on the door, no matter where you went to sleep. So they hadn't come near catching me at any stage. But after I did the helicopter job, they knocked my door, so to speak, within 11 days. They picked me up. So I had to assume I was grassed up. Somebody informed on it. Was taken into questioned and brought to the bridewell, and they questioned me, and I refused to talk to them. And after a day or so, one morning, or it was about dinner time, the door opened in the cell, and my policeman came out and he says, "I want to see you downstairs." I said, "Yeah, okay." So I walked out. And the bridewell is like a small prison. It has a circle, and the circle has I don't know, it's at least 2 stories, maybe 3. It's 2, I know. But I was up on the second floor, and I walked out onto the walkway, and I looked down into the circle as it was. And you couldn't get an all policeman into this circle. Not one of them with a uniform, all plain clothes, all faces, a sea of faces, all staring up at me. So I walked down, and they opened, and I walked through all the way through to the interview room, as they call it. So I was in the interview room. They asked me a couple of questions, and I refused to talk to them and said, "Okay, we go." So I had to do the whole thing in reverse again. So they obviously had these policemen in to see this lunatic had hired this helicopter, and possibly to see who they had could they identify me and maybe charge me with something else, because they had nothing really on me at this stage. The map, this infamous map, they had that, and that was about it. So next thing, I'm charged. I appeared in the special criminal court. Remanded in custody. I go downstairs, and there's a guy in the cell, and I'd never seen him before. And I said, "Yeah, how are you doing? Okay, what are you in for?" I says, "I'm in for the helicopter escape." I'd never met this guy before, so I didn't say very much to him until I got to Portlaoise, and confirmed he was okay. It turned out he was Dermot dealing. Dermot had been selling newspapers, unfortunately, at night, and he came across the getaway car, which these people were supposed to have cleaned and dumped and removed weapons and everything, all evidence and all the rest of it. And they were supposed to put their original plates back on and leave the car back where they got it, or back in the street. But contrary to doing all of that, what they did was they just kept the car, waited till dark, went out, tried to start it, wouldn't start, or pushing it out. Dermot came along and said, "Dermot, give us a push for this." He gave it a push. Dermot got 3 years. His fingerprints were got in the car. So Dermot gets 3 years, and I got out in bail, actually. I was out for a couple of months. Anyway, the case, I was supposed to appear early in February or something, the specials, and I decided I wasn't going to bother appearing, but I would skip bail and carry on with life as it was. But my barrister, who was Tony Hederman ended up as being Chief Justice in later years. But Tony Hederman at that time was commanding a fee of £1,000 a day to represent people in court. And £1,000 in 73 was a lot of money. So he was the best. And he came down and he said, "Listen, Brenton," he says, "I am guaranteeing you," he says, "you come to court with me tomorrow, I guarantee you," he says, "I will get you off on that charge." So I looked at him and I said, "Okay, well, might as well." So the next day, Bill, who's quite a character on his own, he owned the old Shieling. Bill picked me up in a sports car, and me and him landed up to the special criminal court and bailed out and walked in. And Hamilton, who was the judge, looked at me and he said, "Hey, how did that man get into my court? That man has a warrant on his for his arrest. How did he get in here?" And they went to arrest me, and he nearly threw a wobbler. He says, "You can't arrest the man in the court," he says. So they're all over around the bench and they're looking at me and talking and whispering and pointing fingers. And the whole object of this discussion was how to get me legally from the floor of the courtroom into the box, into the, what does they call it, where the accused sat. And Dermot Teeling was already up there standing here. So I got fed up with all this. I just walked up and sat down in the box, and they seemed to be happy enough with that. The trial went on ahead. I was going for 3 days, and at the end of it all, the judges went off as they do to figure out whether or not I was guilty. Probably to drink tea or wine or something. The back was in. They already had me guilty. It didn't matter. I was going down. Anyway, they go off, and Heatherman, I'm down in the holding cell along with Dermot Teeling, and who comes down? Only Heatherman. And he shook hands with me. He says, "There you are. Didn't I tell you I'd get you off?" He says, "But I'm not off. I'm not off yet." Well, he says, "I'm telling you," he says, "that prosecution was just after coming over and congratulating me on conceding defeat." He says, "You're walking, both of you. The only place we were walking was up to the box. When I walked up there, we were found guilty and got 3 years. Peace." I had him on, he went crazy. He said, "No, this is a travesty of justice." He says, "It's a slur on my reputation as a barrister." He says, "And I'll fight this," he says, "all the way to Europe and it won't cost you a penny." I said, "That's fair enough," I says. So off I went down to Portlaoise. I was in Portlaoise a while, and one thing about a Republican or political jail or political prisoners, the one thing they always have is an escape committee. Sometimes it's just a talking shop, sometimes it's the real deal. This was the real deal, but I couldn't get onto it. I approached Malin, who had been caught at a dance, above all things, and put back inside, and I approached him to, could I get on the escape committee? And he said, no, he says, "We're working at something. I'll be back to you." And seeing as I was the only one in prison that had ever done an escape, I found it a bit strange that I couldn't get on the escape committee, but there it was. So I was wondering about Portlaoise. I certainly wasn't going to stay there. My idea was to get out anyway, so I was wondering about them. This man called Martin McAllister came to me one day and he said, "I want to show you something." He said, I have a plan here. If you want to come and look at this. So he brought me up to his cell up in the doors. And from there, you could see the whole interior of the prison, and across from our block, between our block and the rest of the prison was an open space. To the right-hand side was a wall, which on first inspection you think was outside wall, but it wasn't. It was an interior wall separating the governor's compound where he had his house and all the rest of him. He lived there in better times, probably. He would have been there, and of course you couldn't have the governor getting released through the front gate, so he had a side gate. So here we were. Martin says, "Now listen," he says, "there's a gate, and this is the inside wall." He says, "There's a small gate there." He says, "It's a wooden door, but on the other side of that," he says, "there's a barred gate, similar to all the barred gates in the prison." And he says, "If you look carefully over the top of the wall, you will see the top of another door, which is actually in the outside." Now he says, "I brought this to the escape committee, and they've dismissed it." They said they didn't know what they're talking about. And the minute I seen it, I said, "Martin, this is our way. We're going to do this. This is it." Never mind all that nonsense. I said. So a week or so after that, I found out why I couldn't get on the escape committee, because they were doing a tunnel. An old friend of mine, Ned Bailey, arrived in charged with digging this tunnel or arranging it for a bit. Now, Ned Bailey, maybe I should go back a bit to the helicopter, because when we needed a second time, we decided to land a helicopter out in the country. So the only place I knew to go to was the Heath. The Heath was a hub, distribution hub for the IRA. They got weapons there, and they would break them up and distribute them. And this unit was run by Ned Bailey and his wife, by Sean Tracy, and a man called the German, Jim Hyland. And these people got the place for the helicopter to land. And after that was all done, then they were digging this tunnel. The same unit were engaged in digging this tunnel. And Sean Tracy, who was part of digging the tunnel, he was staying with Ned, and had plans and all regarding this tunnel. Head under the bed, he was sleeping. The guards raided the house. Tracy bailed out, and Ned Bailey got caught and landed in anyway. So after that was happened, Malin then came to me, and I got on the escape committee. And within 6 weeks, I had everybody was out on a roof ready to run out of the prison. It only took that long because I knew the plan. I knew it was going to work. I knew it was good. So it took a little while to get all the bits and pieces together. We figured out that we had an open space to cross, which was a way that had been dismissed. So when I brought the plan to the escape committee, he said, that's all very well. He said, but how do we get from first of all, how do we get out of the block? And I said, well, we can't use any of the regular gates because the regular gates lead to more gates. You know, you'd have block, you'd have a gate and then another gate. You'd have 3 gates in a row and they'd only open one at a time. So that would meant three obstacles. So to get around that, I had spotted a sentry a guard, a prison officer who sat on a roof of boiler house roof where all the heating was. It was a flat roof, 1 story high, and they had a sentry box overlooking one of the Provi yards. So the guy would be out there all the time we were out. And the minute we came in, he was taken in. So I said, okay, when he's being taken in, he comes in through the laundry. We can take him in the laundry. We can get the key, get onto that roof. Then I said, all we have to do is run across the yard. I said to the other place, blow the gates and blow the 2 gates and we're gone. But he says, how do we get across that yard? This is the big, I says, it's not that simple. I said, but it can be done because we have to use a bit of subterfuge. I said, so what we do is we'll dress a few of our people up in Screws uniforms because all you need was a blue short, dark trousers, a tie and a hat. You can make the hat, get the tie in, get the shorts in, get the dark trousers in. All we do is make a hat. At the end of the day, there was more hats and screws than there was prisoners. But when we started doing that, making that, I went to Ned Bailey and the escape committee more or less went to Ned Bailey and Ned was able to arrange to get the explosives in. We got the explosives in without going into all all night of it, into all the details of it. But anyway, we got the explosives in, made up the charges. Jim Monaghan made up the charges. The idea was Martin would carry the explosive. I would carry the debts and fuse. And as each charge was required, Martin would give it to me. I'd prime it, plant it, and blow it. And that's what happened. We got out through this gate. We had it arranged that I had it so arranged that everybody in that prison who wanted to get out was out on that roof that day. Instead of 19 getting away, it should have been 90 got away, or whatever was in there. But the problem was when we stepped out on that roof and we looked down, there was the OC, the commandant of the camp, the Irish soldiers. The commandant and Nancy O carrying the bus stop. I was the first on the roof and I sort of hesitated. Mom was beside me, he says, go, come on. And we went on. I went over, dropped off the roof and ran. And as we ran, Mom kept giving orders, don't be interfering with the soldiers. We didn't want to touch the soldiers for the simple reason that a soldier will defend his weapon and other soldiers will defend the weapons for him. So had we attacked them, we were immediately would be considered as armed and therefore immediately they would shoot at us. So we left them. They weren't going to shoot us. It was impossible for this guy to shoot us. What is he going to do? He's going to spray a whole load of unarmed men. It wasn't going to happen. And anyway, I had reason to believe that they wouldn't shoot us, that their standing orders was not to shoot unarmed people. So we ran across the yard. 19 of us got past before this guy gathered himself up and told us then NCO to open fire, which he did do over the heads of the remainders of the people. So the minute he opened fire, the vast majority of the people coming after me would have never have had shots fired at them, so they stopped. The minute they stopped, the escape was over for them. Before that, 19 of us got past. We blew the gates and got out. And everybody, Martin McAllister, cute sort of a man, he had himself a compass smuggled in, and he had a few bobs. So when he got out, he went on his own and worked his own way back, and was in South Armagh that Wednesday on active service, and we were still in the ditches and Wicklow and places like that. that cross that you see up on the screen at the minute, that's the cross. That is the actual cross that we had to, when we took the explosives came in timber, so we had to take it out of it. We left it in the timber until we were ready, but we had to take it out maybe 2 days before using it, so we had to get it somewhere else to hide it. And Oliver McKiernan used to make these crosses out of matchsticks. So Oliver reckoned he'd make the cross and it had a big base. He says, I'll put everything in there. So he made the base, and that's the tactile cross, not the base, but the tactile cross that the explosives were stored underneath whilst we were waiting to the day on their appointed arrived. That's where they were kept. We got out then, and the interesting thing about the few days we spent in the fields was that we eventually the last house we stayed in, we were under real pressure, and we came to the last house. Mom said, listen, the next house, he says, turn in, we'll see what the story is. So we turned in. Mom and me went up to the door and knocked it, and this gentleman came to the door, and he said, listen, we're Provost, he said, we've just escaped from Portlaoise, and we need somewhere to get out of the way for a while. We're wondering, would you consider helping us? And he looked at us and he said, how many? He said, 6 of us. All right, he says, come on in. And his son was there. He said to the son, take that car, he says, and go round to the shed, put it in the shed and bury it in the bales, he says, so it's not seen. So he took us inside. He sat us all down. He says, now sit down there, he says, I have to say something to you. And he stood in front of him. He said, listen, he says, I'm a blue short, he says. I'm a real blue short. He says, I was in Spain, he says, and I fought with Duffy. He says, and I'm proud of it. He says, that's just my politics. And he says, I'll tell you something. I have no time at all, he says, for your politics. But he says, being a military type person, he says, I have every sympathy with you, he says, and I admire what you've done. And as a result of that, he says, my son and I will do everything we can to get you out of here. And he did. He sent his son to Dublin, who contacted Brian Keenan. Brian sent down 2 stretch limos with 6 women all dressed up for a wedding, flowers in their lapels and all the rest. 6 black suits, pairs of shoes, shorts. We all got into these cars, drove straight to Dublin through all the roadblocks. Nobody looked at us. And the whole thing was over. We were the last ones to go to ground. So that's about it. It was a serious man. And I was that photograph up there at the minute. That's from Mountjoy, Sanger in Mountjoy, where he crossed the border. The same Sanger that they shot the GAA player from Mountjoy in later years. That's the same place. And my photograph's up on one of those wanted posters in the back of it there. So, where do we go from here, David? Give me someone else to look at. East Tyrone. This before this, I forget. I want to give credit to people. I mean, Liam Quinn, who comes from America, and who was later went and was doing work in England, where he had to shoot a policeman, and he was later done a long period in prison for that. Martin McAllister, he got home, he was shot, he did a long time in prison. Tommy McKierney, he was one of the hunger strikers in the H blocks. Morris Conway, he died a few years ago. Tony McNally, he died in New York. Sig Dillon, he was shot outside a what do you call it, sort of a nightclub. He was doing the door, and the loyalists came up and shot him. Kevin Monaghan, he lives in Dublin, and Peter Mullen. I mean, these, you can have the best plans in the world, but if you don't have the people to carry them out, there's all a waste of time. So these are the people who made all these things work. Some of them, not all of them, but they're most the main. Peter Mullen, he removed all the explosives from the timber when we were inside. He didn't go on the escape. but he was killed in a car accident later on. So, Paddy Carty. The time I was on the run, I was on the run down here for, I don't know, north and south, for years I was. And Big Paddy Carty, Big Paddy was a very, very quiet, gentle big man. And he and I were staying in a house in outside Cavan Town in a place called Stradone. And I'd never been, I mean, there were raiding houses, but I'd never been in a house when it was actually raided. So this morning, we had no guns, we had nothing with us, we were just staying there. And they knocked at the door, looked at the cops were dressed, and Paddy and me bailed out the back window. And there was a branch man standing there, he said, "Oh, halt," he says, "I'll have to shoot." He said, "Shoot away." So-and-so, and we ran on. Branchman didn't follow us, but this ordinary guard, the uniform guard, he followed us. He was 3 or 4 feet. We were just that, like, we couldn't run any further. We weren't that fit to that extent. Paddy says, "Listen, Brandon," he said, "I can't go any further." He said, "How long are we?" So we stopped at the ditch. We just crossed the ditch. And the guard was coming running down the other side. And he says, "Now listen," Paddy says to him, "if you come across that ditch," he says, "I can't run any further. But," he says, "I'm not going to let you, or I'm going to bet the bollocks out of you if you cross it. Why don't you just stay there?" he says. So the guard looked at him, shook his head. He sat down, and me and Paddy just walked away the other way. All three of us were bet. We couldn't go any further. And now the guard, that was it. I don't know. We spent a couple of days in the fields until he picked up. So that was about it. When I was out, J.B. O'Hagan came to me one day and he said that I was next in line for that to be going to the Army Council. And I said, "J.B., listen, I don't want to do that job." I says, "I can't do that job." He says, "Why not?" I said, "J.B., it is not accepted, and I accepted the position in the Provost to recognise the court as a standing order, not to, I disobeyed the order. And I recognise the court. Now, I says, I can't sit in the Army Council and tell other people to do something that I didn't do. So I think it was when I refused that position, it was sort of all downhill from there, because I was a bit of a loose cannon. I mean, when I was operating, I would see something that needed to be done or could be done, and I'd get somebody, and I'd go off and do it, and I'd come along afterwards and say, "Yeah, I done that." And that isn't the way things work. So, but I was put up with, people tolerated me because when I did something that worked, whether it was for that reasons or not, I don't know, but they did tolerate me. Eventually, I was still running this unit, and I objected. 75 ceasefire was brought in. And I was, at that particular time, I was staying in Dungannon, and this night I was in the safe house. I was actually staying with a relation. And the British patrol came and sat outside the house all night. They didn't attempt to come in, but they were letting me know that they knew I was there. But my interpretation of that was that for them to know I was there, they had to be getting intelligence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known I was there. And it was against the ceasefire to get intelligence. Plus, there's a couple of other things. There were the British were patrolling roads in nationalist areas that they were to keep out of. They were patrolling them openly, and they were manning. I was given to understand that they set up these posts, these listening posts where you could phone up and make complaints, and they were supposed to be manned by English people, not by Northern Irish people. And again, it was Northern Irish people there. So I decided I'd go. I was still running the unit, and I decided I would go to make a complaint about this, and I didn't agree with the ceasefire in the first place, because I thought it was just an intelligence gathering exercise on behalf of the Brits. So I went to complain, and I said, "Listen, why don't we, I have a unit," I says, "it's that far down," I says, "that no one would know that whether they did the job or not. Why don't we do something and get questions asked on?" I was talking to the chief of staff, and director of operations, and they said, no. Absolutely blew him away with this. They said, no, there's on that. They said, you will not do anything with that unit, he says, unless you clear it with us folks. I said, but I have to finance them. They can't live on. I said, listen, do you understand nothing? I said, you will do nothing unless. I said, okay. I said, another thing, he said, and he slid a piece of paper over towards me, a pen. He said, you write down the names of the people who you have operating underneath you. Well, some of these people were living in precarious situations and were only known to me. I was not prepared. I said, no, I can't do that. And the chief of staff says, no, listen, he said, I'm chief of staff. He's director of ops, and we're giving you a direct order to write those names down. And I said, I can't do that. I won't do it. And I said, but listen, he says, I said, listen, you know what you can do with that order. I said, I'm not giving you these people's names. If you tell me where you want them, I'll give them to you. If, as it appears, you're going to replace me, I said, send the replacement along, and I'll give him the names. And he can give them to you if he wants, but I'm not giving them to you. I won't betray these people. End of story. And I walked out. So a few days later, then I had 3 dumps with specialist weapons and stuff in it that were useful for the type of work I was doing. And I sent someone to check the dumps. All the dumps were lifted and emptied. So I acquired it with this and was told that they were expecting a pogrom in Belfast and were gathering up all the weapons. And this is what they did every so often to disarm people. They would say, we need them for this, that. There's no such thing happening. So the penny sort of dropped. Excuse me. The penny sort of dropped at that stage, and I reckoned I might take a rest. I might need a few weeks off. So while off, I wanted to get out of the country. I hadn't lived with my family for 4 or 5 years, and I'd been in the front line, so to speak, for that amount of time. I was making bad calls and bad decisions and things like that. Well, I hadn't made them up to there, but I was starting to make them from that on. I decided, I went and told them when I was quitting, and the director of ops came along to give me 300 quid. And I thought to myself, like, 300 quid, the only place I can go with my family, and I can be with my family, is America, where I had people, people who were sympathetic and all that. So 300 quid wasn't a lot of money. So I said nothing, but I threw a lot. I totally lost the plot and made really bad calls. I went and done a homework. All I wanted was about $3,000, maximum 2 to 3 grand that I could go off to America and could be comfortable for a couple of months, and then I could come back and carry on again. So off we done this job, and what would normally be good luck turned out to be bad luck, because when we did this job, instead of getting about 9 or 10 grand, which I expected to get, we got 130,000. So here I was sitting with 130,000 pounds, which I didn't want in the first place. I didn't know what to do with it. And on top of all of that, the Provisionals had a GHQ meeting about 2 miles away from where the job was pulled, and they were pinned down there for about a day or a day and a half, and they weren't very happy. So I went off to the States, and I only took myself and my Eugene. We took about 5 grand a piece with us, and that was it. The rest of the money, which was there was 130,000 in the thing. There was 80,000 which I had control of, and I left in a safe house, in an IRA safe house. I left 65,000, which I also had control of at that time, with the intention that when I came back, I could maybe bargain my way back into the IRA and I'll give them this money. But whilst I was away, they found out I'd done the job, and they raided this house and took the 65,000. Another 6,000 when I was caught eventually was got by the guards. So we ended up getting, I don't know, a few thousand out of it. But there was another 40 grand which I never had control of, and I can't account for, and it isn't my job to account for. But that's how I wasn't robbing to get rich. All I wanted was a few weeks off in the sunshine, so to speak. And that's where I ended up. I was wanted by the Provost, I was wanted by the Brits, and I was wanted by the Free Staters. And there was I had luckily enough, I had being operating in the secretive way I was operating, I also had a few houses which no one knew except me, so I was able to hang out for a while. I didn't know, all I wanted was back. The Provost, in order to ostracize me properly, they said I was out to set up a new organization. I had no intentions of setting up any organization. My organization was the Provost. I was a Provost from the start. I was a Provost then. And if it was still about, I'd still be a Provost. I'm just a Provost. I wasn't setting anything up. But that's the way it went. And unknown to me, Co Tyrone, which I won't name them, but they're obvious one, but they took it personal. I didn't know they'd taken it personal. But the minute they took it personal, there was no way back. I couldn't get back. I didn't know that, but there was no way back for me at that particular time. So eventually I got caught. The authorities, I think they put me away they buried me alive. They gave me 20 years for an offence that I think is in English law is a misdemeanor, which is firing shots at somebody. It's hardly a misdemeanor, but that's what it's down as. And I got 20 years. I didn't get 20 years for shooting at the scap. They gave my co-defendant 20 years because they accused him of doing the shooting. And they gave me, they gave me 20 years for being with them. Then I think they let Eugene out after about 10 or 11 years, but they kept me on to do the full 20. When I was there, my wife, I received no assistance from the organisation in any shape or form. My wife received no assistance. Kevin Mannon told his visitors that if they were to give my wife a lift, that they weren't to bother coming back to see him because he wouldn't see him. So even though the state had given me 20 years, certain members of the Provost reinforced that by trying to block me from getting visits, block my family from getting any help outside. No one was allowed to help them, so it was a pretty tough time. But anyway, so we did the time. I did the time. My family did their time. We all came out alive. That's about all I can say about it. Just end it. I'm still here today to tell the story. What about all that? There's not much more to be said about it. You still there, Dalby? What prompted me to write the book? A couple of things. The main one was that I can't think of his name. This guy wrote a book about he was an informer. He wrote the book, and in this book he said that he was sorry.
O'Callaghan.
Callahan. He wrote a book about his life as an informer, and he probably picked on me because I was no longer persona non grata to the Provost, so therefore I couldn't object. Anyway, I didn't know about it, but somebody pointed it out to me later in later years that he had written this book. The incident he wrote about happened on Easter Sunday in Carrickmore. That particular Easter Sunday was the first Easter Sunday that I wasn't in Tyrone, but I came there as a visitor with my family. So I was in Carrickmore, and Tony McNally came to me. I was having a meal with my family. He said, he took me to one side. He said, Brenton, these locals, he says, they have got a young fella out in the field, out not far from here. He says, they're questioning him, they're beating him, and they're going to shoot him. And he says, the problem is, he says, this young fella, he says, he's not entirely there. Like, I mean, he was a bit, I don't know what was wrong with him. I still don't know it, but he wasn't normal. He was a simple sort of person. I said, but this has nothing to do with me. Why come to me? He says, go to the OC. He said, listen, you know who the fucking, sorry, you know who this OC as well as I do. He says, you know what he'll do if he gets this one. He'll shoot him. He says, it'll only take you a minute, he says. If you don't do it, he says, you'll be reading the papers tomorrow, or the next week or so, you'll regret it. So, okay, I got up and I left, and got another guy, and he drove up to this field, and there was a disused shed, and I walked up to the field and was accosted by these four guys, and said, well, I told them who I was, told them who Tony was. I said, I want to know what you're doing. He said, well, we have this man here, he said, and he's an informer, and we're waiting on the okay to shoot him. So I said, well, who's in charge? So this guy stopped for me. He said, come over here. And I was talking, and I said, tell me. I don't know this young fellow, he said, but I've been asked to come and see what you're at. I said, so tell me. Have you got proof this young man's in the front? Yeah, I said, well, tell me. I said, don't tell me what somebody else told you. You're going to shoot him. I said, don't tell me what Joe told you. What do you know about it? What do you know as a fact about this young fellow that is in the farm? And he couldn't tell me. I said, listen, I want the four of you to leave and don't come back here. I said, leave right now. So I ordered them off and they left. I went over to the young fellow and knelt down in front of him, got Tony out of sight. I had no mask on. I took his hood off. I had him hooded and he was tied up, and I untied it. And I told him, I looked at him. He said, look at me. I said, my name. I told him my name. I said, you shouldn't be here. This is an awful, dreadful mistake. I said, it'll never happen again. I want you to go off home. I said, I'm setting you free. This will never, ever happen again. And he was riding a little scooter or something. And I said, listen, if anybody asks what happened, because they'd beaten this young fella really badly. I said, just say you fell off the scooter. I said, if anyone comes to you again, any time about being an informer and the guy, you have my name, go to somebody and ask them to contact me. And I've never heard of him and would never have heard of him if it hadn't been for Callahan writing about it. And it was all nonsense. Like the man, I don't know what. I never read his book. I only read the bits that was about me, and anything he wrote about me was total nonsense, absolute, unashamed lies and nonsense. So, if that's anything to go by, I don't know what the rest of the book's like. He was a cheap person. That's why I wrote the book, more or less why I wrote it. I didn't want. I was also, due to the propaganda that the Provost put out about me at the time, I was down as a rogue and as a sort of scoundrel and robbing for myself, which is totally untrue. Like, I mean, I was a bit of a loose cannon, all right, but I was always, anything I did was for the movement. It wasn't for myself. So I wanted to write the book so that my children could read the truth, and anyone else who's interested can read the truth. As I am today, I own absolutely nothing. I have no property. I have no bank accounts. I have a long list of bangers of cars. The last one I got, the timing chain went, and I still have no car. Never owned a new car in my entire life. So, and I'm challenging anybody out there in the wide world to come along and point out what I've owned, what I do own, what money I have, where my new cars were, where all my houses are, where my holiday homes and all the rest of it. I haven't got it. I haven't got a penny. I haven't, as the man says, a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. I live in a house with this really nice woman. She owns a house, not me. So I don't own anything. So the book's out there and we're doing well. The press and the government and everyone else has ignored me, ignored the book, even though the book is the best selling self-published book ever in Ireland. It has been the third bestseller in Hodges figures. It's been, I don't know, I just can't on. It's a historical document. far as I'm concerned, and that I stand over anything and everything that's in that book. I can't, there's nothing more I can say about it. Read the book. All right, Doug.
Brendan, thank you very much for being so open and talking so freely there. I think it was great to hear, you know, your side of the whole story. And to be
Yeah,
honest, I think it was brilliant. Thank you very much.
no problem.
We do have a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I'll do my best.
you know, the two escapes that you organised, okay,
Yeah.
did you have to get approval from the IRA councillor and got there for the go ahead?
Well, on the helicopter escape, the people at that time, you see, Kevin Mallon at that time was a man who commanded a lot of respect, and J.B. O'Hagan was a gentleman and commanded a lot of respect. Seamus Toomey, I mean, I don't have to tell you who Seamus Toomey is. So, did I have permission? No, they were the permission. They asked me to do it, and you don't refuse these people. Well, you can refuse them, all right, but you don't refuse them on the grounds that they haven't got permission. You assume they had permission. So I didn't contact anyone, and I must have had permission because they gave me £1,000. As regards the escape from Portlaoise, we sent word out that they were behind us and helped us as much as they could with this, but they didn't believe we could do it. And there was a rumour that see, JB and Toomey, they were still outside when we did the Portlaoise thing, and they were staying in Dublin. And the rumour is they were going off down the south of Ireland somewhere, and they actually drove past Portlaoise Jail about 10 o'clock that morning. They didn't think this was going to. They mustn't have thought it was going to happen because they went on past. I know, but it didn't affect them. But the rumour was that they were in such disbelief that this would ever happen that they didn't bother about it. But yeah, we had okay to do all this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So another one from Liam here. How easy was it to smuggle stuff into Portlaoise, and was there prison officers which were sympathetic?
No, it was all done by sleight of hand, so to speak. It was easy, relative to today. It was very, very easy because they had no sniffers, no mechanicals, explosive detectors. They didn't have them, and they didn't even have dogs. So all you had was the screw of the gate, and he'd look at it. Yeah, that looks all right. Put a stamp on it, and away it went in. That was it. It was as simple as that. It didn't. I mean, it's easy now to, in retrospect, to look back and say it was simple, but it wasn't simple then. It was pretty difficult then because what you have to. The thing about prison, when you're in prison, you have no control over anything. You can't. You're solely dependent upon support from the outside. I mean, you can't even open your own door or switch your own light on at that time. You know, you want the light, you had to kick the door and get a screw to come down and turn your light off. That's how useless you were, how trapped you were. You had no control over anything. So we had a patience and keen sense of observation, but mostly patience. Patience was what it was. It's all about. But these people are getting word out and getting things in relatively easy.
So when you escaped from Portlaoise, you were with 6 other folk, is that right?
No, when we escaped out of Portlaoise, there was 19 of us. There was 18 others, but our group, there was 11 initially, and the 6 of us. There's 5 left. We got as far as Newbridge in a safe house, and a lorry collected 5, and a car collected the other 6, and we headed towards a safe house in Wicklow, which would have been fine had we got there without being stopped. But on the way, we had to cross a bridge in Timahoe, and that bridge, all the bridges had blocks on them, you see, because they're like choke points, and you can't negotiate the country without going across certain bridges. So there was two guards there. They were there. They weren't there to capture us. All they were there to do was spot us. So they spotted us. So that, whereas they didn't catch us, it pointed them in the direction we were. So when we were in this house, the two girls that were with us, who were helping us, they went off. We settled into the house. They went off that morning, and I don't know where, they didn't get too far, but they were arrested. So the minute we knew they were arrested, we got out of the house. Not because we thought these girls would give us up, but because they knew, that the authorities knew when they caught these two particular women, that they knew we weren't too far away. So we moved out of the house and into the woods, which was lucky because we were no sooner out than a chopper, fixed wing plane, a convoy of vehicles landed at that very house.
And tell me, did you feel responsible for those 5 people you were left? You were saying that there was 5 picked up by a lorry and 2 others picked up by a car. Why were you not picked up?
There was 11 of us, 11 altogether. And the 5 were picked up by a lorry, and that was their odyssey over. They got to Dublin, and that was it. There wasn't room for us. So the other 6 and the 6 of us, then we went to Wicklow, intend to lay up.
Okay, so there's a fella here who says he lived with Tony McNally in New York.
Yeah.
Do you know Tony? And what was his role?
Tony McNally was the man who took the helicopter into Mountjoy. It's him who took it in.
How many was in the helicopter, if you don't mind me asking?
There was initially I intended to send Tommy McKerney and Tony in, but Captain Boyce said if you send 2 in, we can only take 2 out. So Tony went on his own to take 3 out. So he was on his own.
Yeah.
Along with the pilot, of course. The pilot went in, and they took 3 people out. Tony and the pilot.
Yeah. There's a wee question here from Mick Nugent. Did you know Dermot Crowley from Cork, who was killed in active service near Omagh in '73 with Pat Cartney and Sean Loughran?
I did, yeah. Crow Loughran. That's Paddy Carty, who was raided along with me in the house in Calvin. That's the same Paddy. And Crow Loughran. Crow Loughran was Crow and Paddy were going to rob a bank in Omagh. And Crow's a little small guy, and really humorous man, so he was. And Paddy was a big, quiet, gentleman. So the plan on robbing the bank was I got a large sweetie jar. It's about, I suppose it's 15 or 16 inches tall. It's about 4 or 5 inches square, and it's a big round screw thing, and maybe you know them from a really old-fashioned one. And we had it full of what in them days was called a threepenny bit. A lot of you people won't know what a threepenny bit was, but it was old currency, and at that time it was a little bronze-like coin with about 8 or 9 sides on it. And I had it full of this jar of threepenny bits. They're really little tiny things, about I would say 5 cents or something like that there, but heavy, thick and heavy. And he had a jar, so you couldn't hardly lift this jar. And Crow says, you go into the bank and stand in the queue. I says, the minute you see us coming, I says, I want you to drop that jar on the floor. It was a tile floor. So he saw us coming, Crow dropped the jar on the floor, and there's about 1,000 of these struck me, but everybody's looking at the ground to see what was this? And by the time I looked up, we were all into the bank. So that was Crow Loughran and Dermot and
Dead on. Okay, so at the very start, you were saying you went on your civil rights activist, and you went on a couple of wee marches there. Was it, or what made you feel that the armed struggle was the best solution, and that was the natural progression?
Well, if you've been on the streets of Killeen and the beast specials are coming in and they're dragging their rifles behind them, like you know, and you get shot at, and you get bat off the streets with buttons, and you look at Toilet, and you look at all these different things. What other answer was there? Was no answer. I mean, you had no vote, you had no job, you had no house, and here we weren't even allowed to walk on the street. So, you know, civil rights seemed to be a very mealy-mouthed way of looking at it. And it wasn't my way of doing it anyway. I wasn't happy till the campaign started. I was on my element there. When that campaign started, the day I was caught, I was never more alive. I was, you know, I was on top of my game. I wouldn't say it was great, but I was living. It's hard to describe the feeling. You know, it's to do with adrenaline, and it's to do with a lot of things. And I was easy with what I could do. I knew I was confident in my own abilities.
Right on, thank you. One from Liam here. What's your opinion of the current situation with the North?
Well, my opinion, if you're saying, am I in favour of peace? Yes, I am in favour of peace, because I'll put it this way. And the whole time I was in the IRA, I have never once sent a man out to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So in the present situation, I don't see a need for armed struggle, because if we can't, we're one vote away from what we all set out to get. And if we can't convince them to vote for us, we're certainly not going to convince them by shooting them to come our way. And let's face it, we can't do it without them. It'd be better to do it with the loyalists and the Protestants and all that. And I think the way Brexit has worked out, I think it's going to be a united Ireland in spite of us. That's the way I look at it. Because the Brits have walked themselves into a position here that where there isn't any way out. There's one thing about the Northern Protestant, he's a very, very calculating man. He's a very careful man, and he's interested in money and his farm and his business, and that all goes with Brexit. And Brexit can't last without a united Ireland. It's only a matter of time, I think. And I wouldn't go out and risk my life for my freedom with those circumstances prevail, because if you remember, when I walked out on the morning of internment, I couldn't vote, I couldn't get a house, I couldn't get a job, and I couldn't walk on my own streets. I can do all that things. It mightn't be the way I want them to, but at least I can stand up and I can be listened to. I can get a forum to be listened to. You couldn't have there was no forum to do any of these things, and you had to create these forums, and it all came out of the barrel of a gun. I don't care what anyone says. It's the barrel of a gun put Sinn Féin where they are today, and they may consider that an embarrassing fact, but it is a fact.
And the way you were treated by their, in the late 70s, would you today vote for Sinn Féin if it's not to a personal question?
I see. No, it's a perfectly good question, and my answer to that would be yes, I vote for Sinn Féin. In fact, anyone who doesn't vote to get Sinn Féin in North and South at the same time, it has to be worth a try, irrespective of what you think of Sinn Féin. But they are, and always have been, the only show in town. When they were the Provisionals, they were the only show in town. The Shinners, they're the only show in town at the minute. What other show is it? As far as the North is concerned, I can't see any use for violence. I just can't.
Well, here, thank you very much, Brendan, for coming on. Unless Douglas has any more he can add, that was brilliant.
No problem.
He's an impossible act to follow. Nothing else really to say except thank yourself and Liam for having us, and everyone else for taking the time to listen, I suppose, and turn up. and I hope you found it an enjoyable evening.
I suppose that all I have to say now is this is the book. You probably see it wrong way around as I'm holding it up here, but if you go online, it's in the advert for the show tonight, and we'll have this up on YouTube probably later on tonight or tomorrow, and we'll have it shared on Facebook. So look here, Brendan Hughes, you were brilliant there, you know, and very open, and thank you for that. For often we get people who try and dodge questions when you're asked about today's environment, and thank you for that. And Douglas, thank you for organising it. It was very good, and
Thanks,
thanks
Stephen.
for
Thanks, Stephen.
co-writing the book with Brendan and organising it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I'll just close it up now, and all the best.
Take care. Bye.
Okay.